And it depends on which one you read. Matthew, Mark, Luke, depends on which account that you read. It puts Peter's mother-in-law being healed before or after some of the other stories, but it's at the beginning. You could throw in jokes here of what better way to get Peter to leave his home and go out and preach the gospel than to heal his mother-in-law, right? But I won't say that because I've got a good mother-in-law. She's not here to defend herself. So we don't know much about, we'll read Matthew chapter 8 and verse 14. We don't know much about it. You got Matthew, Mark, and Luke all has an account of what happened. It's just a few verses in each one. But we'll read the Matthew account. Matthew chapter 8 in verse 14. It says, "Now when Jesus had come into Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother lying sick with a fever. So he touched her hand, and fever left her, and she arose and served them." So that's pretty much it. If you read the other two accounts, that's pretty much it. But what we learn from this, there's a couple of things. And in high school it was this way, but in college it was definitely this way. Of sometimes you wonder why this question is on the test. But the teacher thought it was important enough to put it on the test. It was on part of the study guide. I don't know the people that put together these questions. I know Paul and others do know them. I don't know why, they could have chose a bunch of miracles to put in our study. I don't know why they chose all of them, but I'm guessing this one they chose for a couple of reasons. One is we learned that Peter had a mother-in-law, so he was married. And of course, y'all have all heard discussions around that, right? The Catholic Church believes that Peter was the first pope, but they also believe that the pope can't be married. So something doesn't match up there. The other reason I think that maybe they chose it, or possibly could have, Peter's such a important apostle, I guess, in the Bible, right? Having accounts of him when he first gets started being called by Jesus is important as well. I will point out when, just like any good mother-in-law, as soon as she's healed, what does she do? People are in her house. She hops up and starts feeding them, right? She starts serving them. You can point that out as kind of a joke, but you can also point it out of, she probably was a good person, and that, Jesus came to teach us how to serve others, and here's one of the first ones that he healed, and she jumps up and immediately starts serving. So.
Also proves that the apostles had the ability to heal people, so they had a power that was definitely seen by others to bring somebody back from the dead or give them from a sickness or whatever. That definitely God got to be with them.
Right. Well, and this one proved to Peter that, well, I think Jesus did this one, but it proved to Peter, and our whole idea of why are miracles needed, well, he's trying to prove to Peter that, hey, I am who I say I am, and I'm fixing to ask you to give up everything you got and follow me. So, take somebody that's really close to him, and that proved it to Peter. That's about all we know about that one. Number 49, broke the nets. Anybody know what broke the nets? Many fishes. You would know the fishes. This is probably one of your favorites, right? So again, this is one of the, I guess all they were going in timeline order, right? So I'll quit saying that. All these are at the beginning of Jesus' ministry and where he starts selecting apostles. So Peter and Andrew are out in the boat. They've been fishing. I learned from this, or in reading on Google and reading from on this sheet, getting ready for this. Apparently, where they're fishing, and it's said somewhere. I know it said in the Bible. If we swap to it, it says where they were fishing. I don't know if that's that important. But apparently, where they were fishing, it's best to fish at nighttime, and it's best to fish close to the bank. I don't know that much about fishing. I would say fishing close to the bank still is a good idea. I don't know many people that go out and fish all night, around here. Maybe they do. But that's what was happening here. That's kind of the lead up to this story. So Jesus is preaching, and he has a whole multitude of people coming and, getting around him, and he's trying to break loose so that he can start talking to everybody. And so he hollers at Peter and says, hey. Well, he doesn't actually holler, I believe. If you read it close, he just goes and gets in the boat with Peter and says, hey, push out from the shore. And so, excuse me. And so while he's in the boat, then he's able to preach and everybody's able to see him. He doesn't have people all around him. That would make sense. But then he tells Peter to go out into the deep water and let down his fishing nets. And of course, Peter, just like any of us, he's trying to be, at least the way I read into it, because I feel like I know Peter from reading the Bible, but you can read the verses as well. Peter's kind of like, yeah, I don't want to make you mad, but we've been fishing all night, and there's no fish out in the deep, but Jesus says go out there. So he does, which is, something to be said for Peter, right? Many of us, me included, probably was like, I ain't doing that, right? We're going back to the bank. You crazy guy, get out of my boat, right? Because he didn't know Jesus at this time. But anyway, they go to the deep and put down the nets. So Peter and Andrew are in one boat. They put down their nets, and then when they start pulling them up, there's a bunch of fish in the nets. And it says there are so many of them that they had to call their friends or their partners over. So James and John were the partners. They come over the boats, and they both start pulling in nets, and they get so much that it says their boats start to sink. And let's go Luke chapter 5, if you want to turn there. I just thought it was some of the things I find. You can see how my mind works when I'm studying these and reading through it. Some of the things I notice that stand out to me. Luke 5 and verse 1. I'm going to skip over some of that I just went through. I'm going to pick up in verse 7. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish which they had taken, and so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, and were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid, from now on you will catch men." So when they had brought their boats to land, they forsook all and followed him. So some things that stick out to me there. It first says the boats are starting to sink. And, it doesn't really go into that, in depth. Maybe that's just a analogy type thing and to tell us is how many fish it was. Maybe maybe it wasn't, literally sinking. Maybe it was just right there close. But Simon falls down on his knees and says, "I'm not worthy." I think a big part of that, y'all, speak up as you need to, but I think a big part of that is, he realized it's a miracle, right? So, he's saying he's not worthy of Jesus because at that point he realizes Jesus is something greater than himself. But also, I'm wondering how much of the boat sinking came into that as well, because they were in deep waters. We don't know how deep, but it says deep waters, so. But then where that picks up again, Jesus says, "Do not be afraid." So again, I think it was probably, both of those things happening. He's saying, get up. It's okay. I am greater than you. He didn't say all this. I'm just reading into it. Get up. You don't have to be afraid of me. But then also part of the learning in my mind would be similar to when Peter's walking on water later of, "Hey, trust in me. Let's go back to the bank. The boat didn't sink." I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into that. Anybody can speak up as you need to. That's just what goes through my head when I'm reading some of these. For sure, what we know from the story is there's a miracle. You don't normally put down nets and bring up so many that you can catch, right? And especially, when Jesus, calls out everything, they're in deep water, they're away from the bank. Every possible thing could go wrong. with that fishing scenario, and they pulled in more than they could ever pull in. That's the miracle.
You can catch so many fish that you fish, your boat starts sinking.
Have you done that?
Done that with, before.
Okay.
Emptied it out and water was about that far from the top of the boat, we had to just idle back in, we would have fish 20 inches deep in the boat.
Okay.
And just, you know, it empties out, and you can fill them up that way, and you catch it just right, but it's, most people that net have real wide bottom boats, and they're designed for taking big loads, you know, so it's supported and all, but we didn't have that type of boat, and we were about something.
Okay.
Put them all in there, so yeah, you can do it.
Okay.
And we didn't have all of them to run, we had to quit, 'cause
Leave it to our expert fishermen.
no,
I'm picking with you.
I just wanted to see it one time, and I was worried the whole time coming in, cause that water was right at the top of the boat, and too many of us in it. I thought, y'all leave some of us out and let us go back to the boat ramp, take some of the fish out, and come back and get us.
Okay. I've been in a boat where I ate too many Twinkies and it,
Generous, is that another name for, Sea of Galilee?
I don't know.
Because it-
Okay.
On the eastern coast of the Sea of Galilee is a city called Gennesaret. That's where the man was that was in the tombs and was running around naked and they took him in chains. Jesus cast out the evil spirit, ran into the pig, and then the pig ran into the sea.
Yeah.
That's Gennesaret. And so the sea is also called the Sea of Gennesaret. The Sea of Galilee was. So that's why you get that word.
It's in Galilee and Capernaum, see that, all that, you know, just right there, where Jesus was born, raised.
In that area.
That's the reason why I was looking at that, 'cause I always called that the Sea of Galilee, and then now they're calling it the Lake of Gennesaret.
Yeah. I didn't spend a lot of time on it, but I didn't recognize the name either, but that makes sense. I assume everybody could hear Paul. If I can hear him from here, I figure we got it. Any other thoughts on breaking the nets? All right. Number 50. He was touched and cleansed by Jesus. That was kind of an odd one if you hadn't stored it, because there's a bunch of stories in the Bible that probably would relate. It's the leper. The leper. And that can be found in Mark 1 and Matthew 8. So in this one, a leper comes up to Jesus, and you know, the big thing with this one is the faith of the leper, and you get into several of the stories or the miracles stories, however you want to look at it, that's coming up that you know is showing the faith of the people that asked for it, right? So the leper, he's got leprosy. He walks up to Jesus. He's heard of Jesus. He understands, hey, this guy can heal people. You know, he probably doesn't understand completely why or how, but he knows he can heal people. And the way, I've gotten it written down here. We may read it in just a second, but the way he approaches Jesus is he says, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. So that's kind of a different way of, you know, how I would have asked if I didn't know Jesus. Of, you know, anybody that's wanting to be healed probably would come kind of hat in hand, and you know, you wouldn't demand it. But that's certainly a different way of putting it up. If you are willing, you can make me clean. And that one kind of hit home with me. Let me go through the story and I'll come back. So he heals the guy's hand. No, I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead. He heals the leprosy of the guy, and the guy goes off, and that's part of it as well. So Jesus tells the leper, once he gets healed, he says, "Go and tell no one," which is kind of interesting. You know, Jesus says that a few other times, you know, as we go forward in other stories, but this is the first one I know of. But he's telling people, you know, after he heals them, go and tell no one. But as I would have done as well, what did the leper do? he immediately ran out and tell everybody. You can get in discussions around that. I don't know exactly. My thoughts are Jesus is just getting started, and he's not wanting everybody to flock to him immediately and want him to heal everything in the world. If word gets out too much to everybody, then Jesus' main reason for coming to earth is getting ready for his death and making sure people are ready when he leaves, not so much to heal people. That's my thoughts. But he, as we've learned in this whole, study of miracles, is he's healing people so that people will believe he is the Son of God, and what he's doing on earth is real. Got a hand. Well, I hadn't thought about that. Kim's thoughts, if you couldn't hear, they're going to notice when you don't have leprosy anymore. How are you not going to tell people? Yeah, but
He didn't want him to go around doing it and speed up the process. The
Right.
process don't happen quick enough as it is, what Kim was saying. You're gonna recognize that he didn't have leprosy.
Yeah.
Where's it at? What happened? Then he didn't want to go around telling everybody, because then Jesus couldn't do what he needed to do. He had to leave them to his people.
right.
That's what he.
And people wouldn't have known it was Jesus either. They would just known, hey, you had leprosy yesterday, and now you don't. What happened? Was it the new soap you tried, or what?
There were means by which people did recover from leprosy. And they were to go to the priest, and the priest examined them, and depending on what it looked like, if it was white or dark, or, however it was, they would clear them, and they would have to pay an offering, a tithe, and then wash themselves, and then go become clean. And so there was a process that they had to go through. So people, it wasn't like it was completely uncommon for somebody to be able to have their, to be clean. I mean, it's not that it was common, or it would be a miracle, but it was the fact that there was a process that the person could go through themselves. And it says that he went up and spread it out much. So he didn't just go
Okay.
through just the proper channels of priest. He was evidently telling almost everybody that he came in contact with. And when you look up earlier in verse 39, Jesus had a plan. He had already gone out early and prayed, and his disciples followed him. He said, hey, let's go to the different cities in Galilee, and let me go into the synagogues and teach. That was his plan. And then as a result of this and other healings, they're going to start drawing him so much that he can hardly even, get around. And so I think really makes the right next to
Okay. And I didn't put those two things together. At the end of this, miracle, Jesus tells the guy, hey, go see the priest and go through. I didn't put that with, don't run out and tell everybody. But yeah, he did specifically tell him where to go and what to do. So
I'm like the lame man at the gate. I'm gonna be jumping in for joy.
it would be hard not
I'm
to.
sorry, but I'm happy.
Yeah.
Got this done. Might be some people that are healed from leprosy, but it ain't everybody.
Mhm.
I wasn't one of them till then, so.
And then,
It's gonna be hard for me to put a zipper on my lips and say shut up about that.
and I think Jesus knows everything. He knew, right? But I think that's part of the, go and tell no one, kind of like I might do with the kids. Don't get that last whatever, and knowing they're going to get it. Maybe that, I think, there's probably a happy medium in my mind of Jesus doesn't want everybody coming and stopping him from doing his ministry, but he, Jesus came to the world for people to know who he was too. So there's a happy medium there. You wouldn't want to walk around and do miracles and nobody talk about it either. So
Look at the account in Luke, chapter 5 and verse 15, it says, however, the report went around concerning him all the more, and great multitudes came together to hear and be healed by him of their infirmities. So he himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. So rather than going into the temple and teaching, like he had reached his friend, people are coming
if you couldn't hear Mr. Joe, so at the end of well, at Luke 5 and verse 16, it says, Jesus withdrew himself into the wilderness and prayed. So the point being made, there's so many people coming to him, he couldn't preach in the synagogue. He had to, withdraw to the wilderness by himself sometime. Some other things that stuck out to me in this, I almost got to it before I finished the story just because it hit home with me. The guy says, the leper says, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. I've gone through this in my head over the last few years. The way I end up praying, and this isn't about me, but this kind of makes a story of when I'm praying, let's throw out something silly, asking God to let me kill a big buck when I'm hunting, right? Throw out whatever it is. I have no doubt that God can do anything he wants, right? If he wanted to, he could cause a big buck to walk in that door right now and lay down in front of me, right? He can do anything he wants. But I end up praying kind of like this guy of, I don't know what God wants, right? So the way my prayers are, this is what I would like, God. If it's okay with you, would you allow it? I don't know if anybody else has those thoughts. And not to get us too far away, but I've even struggled with, God has a plan. I tend to think, the people we read about in the Bible, the Moses and the Abrahams and the Peters and whoever, those were special people. Those were, that's why they're in the Bible. I don't put myself in the same boat literally with Peter here or or with Moses or Abraham. Those were special people. So, God, if you leading, I guess, probably not the right word for this, God doing stuff, specifically for them, well, that was part of God's plan, and that's why it's written in the Bible, so that we can, know all of that happened. I don't know that God's cares if I kill a big buck or not. I'm pretty sure he don't care, whether it happens or not. I'm not God, but why would he? But, if it makes me happy, maybe he cares. I don't know, but that's the way I approach my prayers, and that's why it hit home with me, is just, if you're willing, would you let this happen? And I don't know. Does anybody else have thoughts on that, or do y'all pray with, if I pray, because there's other verses in the Bible that make you, feel this way as well. If I pray for a buck to come in and I have enough faith, that buck's going to walk in. There's two different kind of points of views of God can do it if he wants to, or God's going to do it if I have enough faith. I'm the only one that's had those thoughts. Okay.
Bill, and he needed dry weather to get his loads, out of the woods to the mill. So I prayed for rain. I would be hindering his work. He prayed for dry weather. He might be hindering my work. So you have to be careful that what you pray for is something that is appropriate in God's time. And now certainly there are times when it's real dry, we need to pray for them, but we just need to be careful that our prayers not offset somebody else's goodwill, the good fortune, or their prayers.
Right. Okay. You don't want to have competing prayers. There may be somebody from PETA praying at the same time for that buck not to walk by me. So.
I always pray for the ability to do my part the best, not make mistakes. Like that big buck was coming up, let me be alert, maybe do my part of it. I missed a fish, I'm trying to figure out why I missed that fish or whatever. Then start putting the problems out there and start trying to solve them and do it that way. That's what brings me joy, is facing adversity and then overcoming it.
Okay. Yeah, that's a different way of looking at it too. You know, God's given me the abilities to hunt or fish, or and given me the abilities to learn all this, so that when that buck does walk by, he's prepared me to. That I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I think that's what you're saying, though.
Trying to see God's creature like that, something that's a big buck or something like that, that'd be how a lot of people just get to see him. Whether you kill it or not, at least you had the opportunity. That's,
Yeah.
so all of what Joe was saying in there, in James, it says, what we should pray for is, God will, we should live or do this or that. So there's things that we're gonna do, and one of them is either we're gonna live or die, and the other one is we gonna do this or that. So, do what's set before you, and do it the best you can, and just you do it to the Lord, and it'll always be right.
Right. Okay.
Joey, in more than one occasion it says, whatever we ask in faith, nothing wavering. And that faith, faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. So if our prayers are proper, Christ said, you have not what you ask not. And when you do ask, you ask amiss. So sometimes we ask erratically, or, maybe our heart's not right, or got the wrong motive, or we're not faithful in it, or fervent in it. There's a lot of ingredients that take place. And there's also a occasion where he says, two or more ask these things, that's one thing is binding. And so sometimes we need the support of someone else to pray with us, to help us in that infirmity, to help us in that endeavor, to make sure that our motives are right, that our intent is correct, and ultimately, whether our prayer is answered in the way that we initially hoped or not, His grace is sufficient. And we'll remember that, even Paul prayed for some things to be relieved, of, like Jody said, and it wasn't. So because of that, he trusted in God's grace. That's the ultimate thing. Everything's not going to be perfect in this life, but they will work together for those that love the Lord in the end. How's it going to work together? I'm not sure. You might have to go through a lot of hardship like Joseph did. But the Lord will work those things together if we're seeking His will through faith.
No doubt in my mind, the poor fishermen that was fishing all night long were diligently doing what you were trying to do by killing a big buck. They were trying to catch fish.
Mm-hmm.
And they fished hard, used every bit of their knowledge and know how they could to try to catch fish, and they come in empty handed. So it's not a guarantee it's gonna happen, but then when the Lord put them out there, the fish were there, they didn't catch them, until he said, throw your nets out this side. And there was reluctance there, it's not.
Right.
But if we do what the Lord tells us to do, it'll work out. It might not be you kill a big buck that day or the next week, or it might be later on, or it might be years later before you get to that, but you keep trying. A lot of people though kill a great big buck and then they quit because they don't think they can ever top it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's some sides of being successful
Yeah.
that cause you to be discouraged in a way. LaRon Burke killed a big one and he never deer hunted again.
Hmm.
So there's different sides to all kinds of angles you come from.
It is, yeah. Yeah, God may understand it. The big thing is for you to have, yeah, that's right. And that's what, to Paul's point, same here, of it's like a lot of things we do as Christians, as church, as Bible-wise, of God wants our hearts. And it's no different than in prayer. If you're just praying for the big buck because, yeah, it's something that'd be fun today, yeah, I don't know that I really believe God to, but I have prayed for some stuff, just like all of y'all, where, I prayed nonstop for, weeks at a time or months at a time, and I think God does hear those things.
But God's got three answers.
That's right. Yeah.
Or not now.
Yeah.
So you gonna get one of those three answers, but He answers every prayer that you offer up.
Yeah. And I've struggled with that of, what's the purpose of prayer, in that God's got a plan. You know, and I read in the Bible, everything in the Bible from Genesis all the way through Revelations, God had a plan, and he used people to, you know, to take care of the plan, and you can see all of that written down and how he used everybody. You know, if God's using me to do whatever God wants me to do, how much say so do I have in that? You know, and if I'm praying for God to do something and he's already got a plan for me, then, you know, but where I've read about that, and I've heard people talk, and the best I've come up with that makes the most sense to me, we read at least twice, I believe, twice that I know of, where people changed God's mind in the Bible. You know, Moses did it one time. I think maybe Moses did it twice. Y'all help me if you know different, but for sure one time Moses prayed or talked to God at that time, don't kill all the people, and God changed his mind. Was it Abraham? There you go. Yeah, Sodom and Gomorrah.
What if it's 40? What if it's 30? What if it's 20? What if it's 10? You know, he's changing his mind, or, you know, I would look at it as he's changing his mind. He went from whatever it was, you're gonna destroy it, to, wait a minute, I can get 50, you would say, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, what if I just get 40? Would that be okay? And then, on that down to 30, so, hey, that's
Yeah.
times that I think that comes into play.
And everything's put in the Bible for a reason. So, you know,
King turned down the woman for what she wanted to do, and she kept on.
That's-
on,
yeah.
until they finally changed. Not because I wanted to give it to you, but because you're being persistent, you won't quit. So here, you got it. You know, so.
I started to bring that one up a little bit ago, but I was scared because I couldn't remember where it was in the Bible, and I was scared I wasn't going to get it all right. But the lady, if you can't hear Billy Wayne, the lady that comes before the king, and he says, yeah, you know, leave me alone, but she keeps coming, and finally the king says, okay, if you're not going to leave me alone, I'll give you what you want. Well, you know, that's, yeah.
Just use that as a way to teach us that he wants us to come. Like, God wants us to come to him with our cares and our burdens and our concerns. I mean, even if we can't put them into words, he wants us, like you say, he wants our heart. And I think that we do need to embrace that.
Anybody else before we move on? I don't know how we went from that to, no, I did it, because I did. That's what, all of that kind of stuff was going through my head, and I wanted to relay that to everybody else to, if you hadn't thought about it, to think about it of, you know, all of that was driven by, you know, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. This guy had some of that figured out already.
One thing to keep in mind is, you know, God works through providence now, not by doing miraculous things. In your example, the deer, if you're out doing something, you know, a deer might possibly walk by you. I mean, that's because deer walk around in the woods. If a deer walked through that door, like you said, that would be a miracle.
It would be.
That's not gonna happen.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, probably not a good example to use, would it? You're right, yeah. So God doesn't, you know, work through miracles is what Mr. Joe was saying. So the deer walking through the door would be a miracle. He's right. Yeah. But I guess my point in that, no doubt God can do anything he wants. I guess maybe, you know, I don't know. I was finna say maybe he can't do miracles. Now he can if he wants to. He chooses not to. There's nothing in the Bible that says he can't do them now. He just has chose not to, so. Anyway, no doubt he can do anything he wants, but he's chose not to, and you're right, that would be a miracle.
And the one, I will make you fishers of men, because also, not every time we go out and study with people are we gonna convert. You know, and so my fishing philosophy, you gotta have your bad days to appreciate the good ones.
Hmm.
So, in this case, you know, when you're going out and you think that you get through to this person and it collapses on you and it doesn't happen, you know, our duty is to go fishing for men. It ain't to catch them.
Hmm.
It's to do what we can to try to catch them, you know, but no one's gonna do the catching,
Hmm.
you know, with the word. But we are to go out and go fishing, take it to them. So that's our duty, and we can't become discouraged because we fish all the time and we don't never get anybody. We gotta keep fishing.
Mhm. That's a good point on the breaking the nets that Billy Wayne was saying. The way that story ends is, and I didn't cover this good, I don't think, is that, you know, Jesus says, come follow me, I'll make you fishers of men instead of, you know, a fish. And Billy Wayne's point, if you couldn't hear it, was that, not every time we go fishing for men are we going to catch fish, but God didn't put it in front of us to catch the fish. He says to go be fishermen of men. Does that cover what you were? One other thing on the leper story that I had written down. I go back to high school for this story to kind of get our minds thinking with, again, it's not about me, but in high school, this was in 11th grade, sitting at lunchtime. I can remember when it happened. I had a friend that went to a church, a group of people that believed in, miracles happening, like on Sunday, like, when they were met together. And so, we were talking about that at lunchtime at one point, and even in 11th grade, I knew, that, the reason Jesus did miracles, the reason the apostles could do miracles was to show who they were. Not, my argument at that time was, Jesus didn't do miracles to help the people. He did miracles to show people who he was. Same way with the apostles. Looking back on that conversation, I was wrong. and to back up that statement that I just made, it says on this story of the leper, it says Jesus was moved with compassion when the guy came to it. And there's some more miracles that follow that we're not going to have time to get to. But same way, Jesus was moved to compassion. I think what I was wrong about in 11th grade is that the purpose of miracles is to prove who you are and what you're saying is true, right? No doubt with that. But Jesus was God on earth, but he was 100% man as well. So this lets us see, Jesus' thoughts, his feelings of, how many of us, if somebody came to any of us today with leprosy and we knew we could heal them, how many of us wouldn't have that, feeling of, man, I need to help them, and it may not, it certainly has to do with, I don't think there was a bunch of people on earth at that time that Jesus could have walked around and healed, right? If his whole purpose was healing only, for compassion, then that's all he would have done is walked around. He could have went to every hospital if they had them there, I don't know, but he could have healed a bunch of people. That wasn't his only reason, but while he's healing people, he's doing it because he cares as well, not just because he wants people to go to heaven. So there's some thoughts around that. I'm not going to get into the next one. I don't know. We've got 2 minutes left. I've covered all the thoughts I wanted to with those. Any thoughts on that last? Anybody ever thought about the compassion of Jesus, the reason he healed? Can anybody offer in?
Multitudes of the people had compassion because they were sheep with no shepherd. So not just people in their sickness and disease, but just in their difficulty in handling life, looking for proper leadership. He had compassion on people. And so that was the core of Jesus who he was. It's a God of compassion. Even when Peter's down, sees himself in sin. He said, hey, it's okay. He offers in that grace and brings him up out of that, which is going to be a repetitive thing in the life of Peter, as you pointed out. He walks on the water and he falls. Christ lifts him up. When he falls at the garden, he denies him those 3 times. He sins for Peter to say, hey, I'm ready. Now it's time to get to work. Christ does that. He has compassion of God.
Right. And my mind goes to what the shortest verse in the Bible is. Jesus cried, and I'm looking over here because I can't think of the name of the guy he just brought back from the dead. We were discussing. There you go. We were discussing earlier of especially when I get up here, I can't remember my own name sometimes. But with Lazarus, I've heard it both ways. Preached and talked about. He cried because he knew he was bringing in. He knew Lazarus was in, or going to heaven at some. He was in good shape when he died, and he's fixing to bring him back to a world where it can go south. And then I've heard it the other way of he cried because You know, this was one of his good friends that just died. I think, there you go. I think it's both as well. Yep. I used to be swayed so much to one side of, no, he cried because he didn't want to bring him back to earth. He wasn't here to, you know, heal people, but he was human. It's both, I think. Yep. I think you're right.
The feeding of the 5,000 and 4,000, yet the word said that he had compassion on them. He'd seen they're hungry, and he wants to feed them, you know. That compassion is the human side and the godly side, but we get to see it in the physical form through reading the Bible, that they saw it at the time. You saw earthly God, Jesus, having compassion upon the people. God does the same thing, but it's things that we don't really see because we can't see God working like that. You just see through the things that He does.
Right. Okay. And,
You gotta remember that God's main compassion for his people was that he wanted them to be saved. That's why the whole reason he came to earth and did miracles is to show that he was from God. So that he could die on the cross for people's sins.
yeah,
Bring us to God.
doesn't matter how many people you heal here on earth, it's temporary. Heaven's forever. So, yep, that's the main thing he shows compassion for. You're right. That's a good one to end on. Thank y'all.